But for the US, in some respects, it's also existential because it's very difficult to be the global hegemon and say that we couldn't even beat a regional power with, not much military behind it like Iran.
Michael Every, welcome to the business.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So the US-Iran ceasefire is gone. The blockade on both sides looks to be staying. There's reports the US wants to put boots on the ground on Iranian islands. I mean, this conflict is not slowing down.
No, it doesn't. If anything, it seems we're going through another phase of escalation. We'll have to see how far that escalation goes and how long it lasts before we possibly see another phase of de-escalation. But the fundamental disagreement or lack of agreement between the two sides is just not going to shift until something far more dramatic happens.
And when you say something far more dramatic, what would that be?
One side or the other winning, or forcing the other to retreat, because this is a war. Clearly, sometimes it's an economic war, sometimes it's a physical war, sometimes it's a targeted physical war, as it is at the moment, largely around Hormuz, and sometimes it's a broader range of US attacks trying to take down a broader range of targets, ostensibly again about Hormuz, but potentially moving even wider than that if necessary to try and pressure the regime. And one side or the other is going to win it one way or another, but that can mean lots of different things.
Well, I mean, the Iranian side says this is an existential conflict. They're really nailing their colours to the mast there.
They are. That said, I have argued repeatedly since this began that for the US, in some respects, it's also existential because it's very difficult to be the global hegemon and say that we couldn't even beat a regional power with, not much military behind it like Iran, because A, we didn't want to put boots on the ground, which clearly limits your options, and B, we ran out of munitions, and C, we were afraid of what was going on with the midterm elections and with the oil market. So if you put all that together, it really would put serious shackles on US actions going forward at a time when its actual economy, in terms of the physical, industrial, military economy, not this consumer-facing side of the economy, is already not able to keep up with what China is doing. So if you take away the fact they don't have that military card either, it's pretty existential for the US too.
This week, Donald Trump planned for around 24 hours to impose a 20% pass-through toll in the Strait of Hormuz, much more than what the Iranians were initially planning on imposing. I mean, is this policy on the run from the White House? And what are markets making of it?
Well, markets ignored it, and I think they were right to ignore it and wrong at the same time, because as always with Trump, as people have to say repeatedly, and I will repeat again, you have to take him deadly seriously in what kind of thing he wants to achieve. But the tool or the direction that he's using to try and get there can change at a moment's notice. He's like a trader, he'll just change positions in a second, but he actually wants to make a profit. Now, what is he doing there with that particular threat of a toll? He wanted to get the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, to either fight alongside him against Iran, which makes it more likely that he will win militarily, because they have a lot of weapons they're just choosing not to use and just sitting on, or he wanted them to pay him directly, or both. America is not, the message very clearly here, America is not going to go around the world fighting other people's wars for them anymore and paying for them. Other people will be paying for that and or contributing in kind. That was the message, I believe, and that's what's now happened. He said he wants FDI instead.
And you talk about foreign direct investment. I mean, the Gulf states are looking at investing in the US in order to secure protection because this conflict is potentially going to affect them as well if it isn't already.
Well, it's hugely affected them. I mean, you can ask the question, will they be in a position to invest in the US if the conflict goes badly wrong and all their energy infrastructure is smashed and their desalination plants are hit and they're economically ruined and they don't have the cash to invest in the US. So there are question marks over that, even though Iran, for the moment, is not hitting their energy again, and it's not hitting their desalination. It's mainly hitting US military bases so far. So we'll have to wait and see. But if you're going to try and get those terms, you have to win the war.
You mentioned the oil market, and it's certainly showing up here at the petrol pump. Brent crude has risen more than 10% in about a week. Where do you see it going?
Well, our energy strategist, DeLaura, said earlier this week that if we moved to a phase which I am making the pun about is comfortably bomb, where effectively the US thinks it can go back to war without really rocking the markets, benchmark prices in US dollars for Brent are likely to stay in an 80 to 85 range. Now we're at 85 as I'm talking to you right now, so the top end of that range. And you can drift a bit above it, you can drift a bit below, but I think 80 to 85 is sustainable for now, provided China doesn't start stepping up imports again. But number one, that depends on how much oil gets through Hormuz, and right now it is drying up again. So the US again needs to win that war physically. And number two, totally overlooked, or very much overlooked, to be more accurate, it's not the price of Brent that matters right now. It's what we call the crack spread, which is what it costs to actually turn a barrel of oil into a barrel of diesel or gasoline, which is not the same thing as the crude oil. And that crack spread is almost doubling the price of a barrel.
So is it the products that need to be refined that are facing the biggest shortage globally? Is that the issue?
Absolutely. Provided you can still take crude out of your reserves, which the US is still doing, Japan is still doing, China actually probably hasn't even started to do yet, but theirs is so large they could run for a very long time. You have enough crude, but crude is not the refined product. We only have so many refineries in the world that can turn it into product. A lot of them used to be in Hormuz and are no longer accessible the same way that they were. And a lot of them are in Russia and have been blown up by Ukraine. So we have a long queue of crude, which is now starting to dry up again, by the way, trying to get into refineries to turn into the product that we actually use. That's why we're feeling more of the pain at the Bowser, as it were.
Well, back to how this conflict comes to a head, if you like. Do you see a US exit strategy lying in the November midterm elections?
Well, I thought they wouldn't start fighting again properly until afterwards, but I did always see a risk that it could happen sooner. As I said a moment ago, I think this is existential for the US in a different way to Iran, and it won't back off completely, even if it's possible in another few weeks it says, right, let's talk again for a while, and then restarts again. But ultimately, it needs a resolution. One other point I want to add very quickly, it's a bit of a high level concept, but stick with me, that Hormuz is what we call a global choke point. Clearly, we can see that now. It's choking global energy. The US national security strategy clearly states that they want to control global choke points. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do it. If they can't, I would argue the only logical alternative, if you can't control a global choke point, is to make it not a global choke point. And you do that by disrupting it so much that everybody builds alternatives. We get alternative supply, alternative pipelines, alternative flows put in place so that ultimately no one has to control Hormuz because it really isn't that important. And don't rule out that being part of what looks like the US madness here. That may be the method.
Michael Every, thank you so much.
Thank you.